My husband texted me, "I just inherited $1 million family fortune. I'm filing for divorce." A divorce envelope was already waiting for me at home. I signed everything without a word. He didn't know that his entire inheritance actually belonged to— Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. There are moments in life that split your world cleanly in two, the before and the after. I know that now. But back then, in the autumn of my 68th year, I was still living comfortably in the before, with no idea that the ground beneath me was already cracking. My name is Dorothy Hale. I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I have lived in the same white clapboard house on Maple Ridge Road for 41 years. My husband, Harold, built that house with his father's hands and his grandfather's money. Old Virginia money, quiet money, the kind that doesn't announce itself at parties. Harold passed 9 years ago from a stroke, peaceful, in his armchair, with the evening news on and a cup of chamomile going cold on the side table. I held his hand. I kissed his forehead. And then I became, as they say, the sole trustee of the Hale Family Trust. Our son Raymond, Ricky to me since the day he was born, though he'd bristled at the nickname since his 20s, had grown into a man I sometimes struggled to recognize. He was handsome like his father, broad-shouldered and easy with a smile, but somewhere along the way, the warmth had thinned. He married Kristen Voss 8 years ago in a ceremony that cost $40,000, most of which I quietly covered. Kristen was pretty in an aggressive way. Sharp cheekbones, sharper ambitions. She called me Dorothy, never Mom. I told myself that was just her upbringing. I told myself a lot of things. For most of those 8 years, Sunday dinners at my house were a reliable ritual. Ricky and Kristen would arrive at 6. Kristen would compliment my curtains with the particular enthusiasm of someone who found them hideous, and we would eat and make careful conversation around the things we never said. It wasn't warm, but it was stable. I knew my role. I was the grandmother who kept the memories, the woman who held the family name, and though no one spoke of it directly, the woman who held the purse. The first crack appeared the previous spring. I noticed it the way you notice a sound in a quiet house. Not immediately, but with a slow, gathering certainty. Ricky had started stepping outside to take phone calls. Not always. Not dramatically. Just often enough that I began to note it. He'd glance at his screen, murmur something about work, and disappear to the back porch. Through the kitchen window, I'd watch him pace the flagstones Harold had laid by hand 30 years ago, his back to the glass, one hand pressed flat against the railing. Was it work? Ricky sold commercial real estate, and his hours had always been irregular. I told myself that too. Then came a Sunday in late April, when he arrived without Kristen. She had a headache, he said. He seemed distracted throughout dinner, pushing food around his plate, asking questions he didn't listen to the answers for. When he hugged me goodbye at the door, he held on a beat too long, the way people do when they are about to do something they know they shouldn't. I stood at the door and watched his taillights disappear down the oak-lined drive. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Not fear, exactly, more like recognition, the sense that something was already in motion. By June, I had noticed other things. A change in Kristen's manner toward me, a new briskness, an impatience barely concealed beneath her usual gloss. She had begun asking questions about Harold's estate, framed as curiosity. How does a family trust work exactly? Are those assets separate from personal assets, so the house would be considered part of the trust? I answered carefully and changed the subject. She smiled her sharp smile and moved on. I said nothing. I am from a generation that says nothing for as long as possible. Then came the morning of September the 14th. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and the crossword when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ricky. All capitals. The way people type when they are too excited to remember manners. Mom, I just found out I inherited $1 million family fortune. I am filing for divorce from Kristen, starting fresh. I read it twice. I set the phone down. I picked it back up. I didn't understand at first. Harold's trust was structured precisely. I was the trustee, the sole beneficiary of income, and any distribution to Ricky required my written approval and a formal amendment process. There was no version of events in which Ricky found out he'd inherited anything because he hadn't. Not yet. Not unless someone had told him something that wasn't true. Who had told him? And what exactly had they said? I was still sitting with that thought when I heard the mail slot open. I walked to the front hall in my slippers. On the mat was a manila envelope, no postage, hand-delivered. My name on the front in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it at the kitchen table with the letter opener Harold gave me on our 30th anniversary. Inside was a divorce petition. Raymond Harold Hale versus Kristen Marie Hale. Filed the previous day in Albemarle County Circuit Court. There was a sticky note attached in Kristen's handwriting. Sign as witness. He wants this finished quickly. I sat very still for a long moment. Outside, the blue jays were arguing in the walnut tree. The kitchen clock ticked. Then I picked up my pen, signed my name in the witness line, sealed the envelope back up, and began, for the first time in years, to think very carefully about what I actually knew. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in Harold's side of the bed. I had slept on my side for 9 years, but still thought of the other half as his, and stared at the ceiling and did what I had not done in a very long time. I did arithmetic. The Hale Family Trust had been established by Harold's father, Chester, in 1971. It had been amended twice. Once when Harold and I married, and once when Harold died, at which point I became the sole trustee and primary beneficiary. The trust held the house on Maple Ridge Road, valued currently at around $800,000. It held a portfolio of conservative investments, municipal bonds, a few blue-chip stocks, a money market account, currently worth approximately $1.2 million. And it held a small parcel of farmland outside Staunton that Harold had inherited from his uncle, which had been appraised the previous year at $220,000. Total, somewhere above $2 million. Ricky knew the trust existed. He had sat in the lawyer's office the year after Harold died and listened to the summary. He knew he was named as a contingent beneficiary, meaning that if I died or chose to dissolve the trust in his favor, the assets would pass to him. He knew this. What he apparently did not know, or had perhaps chosen to forget, was that none of it was his yet. Not a single dollar. Not unless I said so. So how had he come to send that text with such confidence? I just found out I inherited $1 million family fortune. Found out from whom? I turned on the lamp at 2 a.m. and got my notepad from the nightstand. I have kept a notepad there for 50 years, a habit Harold teased me about, and I wrote down what I knew. Ricky believed the inheritance was already his. He was filing for divorce from Kristen. The divorce papers had been hand-delivered to my door by someone, presumably Kristen herself or someone acting for her. Kristen had asked me to sign as a witness, which I had done without thinking. I stopped. Had I made a mistake by signing? I was not a party to the divorce. I was not Ricky's attorney. My signature as a witness on a petition was a formality that confirmed only that I had seen the document, not that I endorsed it or had any legal stake in it. I had not committed myself to anything, but Kristen had wanted that signature quickly. That bothered me. Why the urgency? If Ricky was divorcing Kristen, what did Kristen gain from speed? And then, slowly, the picture began to rearrange itself. What if Kristen wasn't simply being discarded? What if Kristen knew something Ricky didn't? Namely, that the inheritance wasn't what Ricky thought it was. What if the divorce was Kristen's move, not Ricky's? What if she had told Ricky about the inheritance? Perhaps exaggerated it, perhaps misrepresented it, in order to trigger a filing, and then intended to leverage that filing in ways I didn't yet understand? Community property, equitable distribution. Virginia was an equitable distribution state. If Ricky believed he was about to inherit $2 million, and if that expectation could be established in court documents filed before a divorce was finalized, I sat up in bed. I needed a lawyer, not the family attorney who handled Harold's estate. A good man, but he was in his 70s now and had retired to Hilton Head. I needed a trust attorney, someone current, someone sharp. I thought of Margaret Cole. Margaret had been the attorney for my friend Ellen's estate dispute 3 years prior, a messy situation involving a stepchild and a contested will. Ellen had spoken of her with a particular respect. She doesn't flinch, Dorothy. She just doesn't flinch. I had never needed that quality before. I needed it now. The next morning, I called Margaret Cole's office at 9 o'clock when it opened. I used my most ordinary voice. I said I had some questions about a family trust and needed a consultation at her earliest convenience. Her assistant put me down for Thursday at 2. Between then and Thursday, I did what I had always done in difficult times. I kept my routine. I went to the farmer's market on Wednesday morning. I watered my tomatoes. I called my friend Ellen and did not mention any of this because I had learned long ago that the moment you tell someone your plan, the plan starts to belong to the telling and not to the doing. But I did one other thing. I went to Harold's study, a room I had largely left unchanged, because some rooms are better left as shrines to the people who loved them. And I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one with the small brass lock, and I took out the folder marked Trust Documents in Harold's careful block lettering. I spread the papers on his desk under the green lamp he'd had since law school. I read every page, every amendment, every beneficiary designation, every clause about distribution, dissolution, and succession. And when I was done, I knew with absolute certainty what I had suspected. Ricky had not inherited a single thing. Not yet. Everything, every dollar, every acre, every share, was mine. Fully, legally, unambiguously mine. The question was no longer what I owned. The question was what someone was planning to do about it, and whether I was going to let them. I put the documents back in the folder. I locked the drawer. I turned off Harold's green lamp. No, I thought, I am not. Margaret Cole's office was on the second floor of a restored brick building on Water Street, above a bookshop that smelled of old paper. I had passed the building hundreds of times over the years without ever going inside. I took the narrow staircase slowly, holding the rail, the folder of trust documents under my arm. Margaret was younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead like a second set of eyes. Her office was orderly in a way that communicated confidence rather than effort. She stood when I entered and shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "please sit down. Tell me what's happened." I appreciated that she said, "Tell me what's happened," rather than "How can I help you today?" I sat down, opened my folder, and told her. All of it. The text from Ricky, the divorce papers on my mat, Kristen's signature request, The trust documents. My suspicions about Kristen's timing. Margaret listened without interrupting. She took notes in a small, cramped hand. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen against the legal pad. "You signed the witness line on the petition?" she asked. "I did. That's fine. As you suspected, it carries no legal weight in terms of your interest in the trust." She paused. "But I want to be clear about something. Are you asking me to help you protect the trust assets? Or are you asking me to understand what's already in motion?" "Both," I said. She nodded once, as though she had expected that answer. "Let's start with what the trust actually says." She read through the documents methodically, asking me occasional questions. After 40 minutes, she set the papers down and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Hale, this trust is yours, completely. Your son has no current legal claim to any asset held within it. He is a contingent remainder beneficiary, which means he stands to inherit if and when you choose to distribute or dissolve, or upon your death. But that event has not occurred, and cannot be triggered by him unilaterally under any reading of this document." I had known this, but hearing it spoken aloud by a woman with a law degree and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead made it settle differently, made it real in a way that my 2 a.m. arithmetic had not. "Then why does he think it's his?" I asked. Margaret's expression was careful. "That's the question I'd like answered too. Do you have any sense of who might have told him otherwise? Or why?" I told her about Kristen's questions at dinner, the 2 casual inquiries about how a trust works, whether assets were separate, whether the house was included. Margaret wrote this down. "It's possible," she said, choosing her words, "that someone gave your son a selective and misleading picture of what he stood to receive and when. Whether that was negligent or strategic, I can't say yet. But if it was strategic, if someone represented to him that these assets were already his in order to influence his actions, including a divorce filing, that becomes a much more serious matter." I drove home on the back roads, the way Harold and I used to on Sunday evenings, through the fields going gold in the October light. My mind was quieter than it had been in weeks, not because the situation was resolved, but because I had taken a step. I had stopped being a woman things were happening to and started being a woman who was doing something. I did not know then that Kristen had noticed. I found out later, from Ellen, who heard it from her neighbor who knew Kristen's friend, that the day after my Thursday appointment, Kristen had driven past my house twice. Just driven past, slow, the way people do when they are checking on something without wanting to be seen checking. She had also called Ricky that evening. Ricky called me the following morning, more casual than the call warranted. "Just checking in, Mom. You doing okay? Any news?" "I'm well, Ricky. Thank you for asking." A pause. "You haven't talked to any lawyers or anything, have you? About the trust?" There it was, quiet as a pin dropping. But there it was. "What makes you ask that?" I said. "No reason, just Kristen mentioned you might have some questions. I wanted you to know you can just ask me directly. We're family." "We're family. Wasn't that interesting?" "I know we are," I said. "I'll keep that in mind." I hung up and called Margaret. "He knows I met with you," I said. "Or suspects," she said, which amounts to the same thing. "Mrs. Hale, I want to start preparing a formal declaration of your trustee position. A document that clearly establishes your sole authority over all trust assets, current market value included. I also want to contact the court where the divorce petition was filed and register as an interested party on behalf of the trust, given the apparent misrepresentation of the assets involved." "Do it," I said. And just like that, the first official move was made. The trust was mine. Margaret had confirmed it. The court would know it. And now Ricky and Kristen, whoever had set this in motion and whatever they had planned, would have to reckon with the fact that I had not simply signed the witness line and gone back to my crossword. I was in the game. Margaret filed the formal trustee declaration on a Monday. By Wednesday, both Ricky and Kristen knew. I don't know which of them called first, their attorneys or each other. What I know is that at 4:15 on Wednesday afternoon, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A dark blue SUV, slightly too new for the neighborhood. Kristen got out first, then Ricky. They walked toward the house side by side, which struck me as odd given that one of them had supposedly just filed to divorce the other. I watched them from the front window for a moment before opening the door. "Mom?" Ricky's voice was pleasant, but the pleasantness was a coat thrown over something that wasn't pleasant at all. He was wearing a blazer on a Wednesday afternoon, which he never did unless he wanted to appear serious. "Can we come in?" I stepped back and let them enter. We sat in the living room, they on the sofa, me in Harold's wingback chair. I did not offer coffee. "We wanted to talk to you about the attorney," Ricky began. "Margaret Cole," Kristen said, as though naming her made her smaller. "I know who my attorney is," I said. Ricky leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping to the register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Mom, you didn't need to do that. Whatever questions you had about the trust, you could have called me. I would have walked you through everything. There's no need to involve lawyers. It makes the whole thing adversarial." "The whole thing," I said. "What thing is that?" A pause. Kristen shifted on the sofa. "The inheritance," Ricky said. "The transition. I know it might feel sudden, but Dad's estate was always going to come to me eventually. We thought it made sense to start the paperwork now while you're still—" He stopped himself. "While I'm still what?" I asked. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "While things are clear, while everything's in order," Kristen cut in smoothly. "Dorothy, what Ricky means is that we're trying to do this in a way that protects everyone, including you. But your attorney has filed something with the court that complicates the divorce proceeding, that interferes with how the assets are characterized. If this goes further, it could drag on for months, years even. Is that what you want?" Was that a threat or a question? In Kristen's mouth, I had learned, the two were often the same. "I want what's accurate," I said. "The trust assets belong to me. They are not marital property in any proceeding between you two. My attorney is ensuring the record reflects that." Ricky's composure slipped slightly. "Mom, I was told—" "By whom?" I asked. He stopped. Something passed across his face. Confusion? Or something trying to look like confusion. "A financial advisor," he said. "A consultant. He reviewed Dad's estate and explained that the trust would pass to me when certain conditions were met." "What conditions?" He said the terms were clear, that as the only heir—" "You are not the only heir," I said quietly. "I am alive, Ricky. I am the trustee. No assets pass without my authorization. Whatever this consultant told you, he was either misinformed or he misled you." The silence in the living room was of the particular kind that follows the first clear truth in a conversation that has been evasive from the beginning. Then Kristen said, "If you fight this, Dorothy, it's going to be very expensive. For everyone. We're trying to settle things cleanly. If you force us into a full legal dispute over the trust characterization, you'll spend tens of thousands in legal fees defending something that's going to end up in the same place anyway." There it was. Not a question. A threat dressed in concern. I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked at my son, who was looking at the floor. And I felt something that surprised me with its steadiness. Not anger, not fear, but a cold, clear calm. The kind that comes when you've already made your decision, and nothing anyone says is going to change it. "I think you should go," I said. They went. Not immediately, and not gracefully. There were more words, A raised voice from Kristen that Ricky quickly hushed. A final look from him at the door that I couldn't entirely read. But they went. I stood at the window and watched the dark blue SUV pull out of the drive and disappear. Then I called Margaret and told her what had happened. "Good," she said. "That's all on record now if we need it. You did exactly right." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat for a long while in Harold's chair. The following morning, I called my friend Ellen and asked if she'd like to drive down to the Shenandoah Valley for a few days. There's a small inn there we visited for 30 years, a place that does everything unhurriedly. Breakfasts that last an hour, evenings on a porch that overlooks a river. I needed that. I needed to be somewhere without the Hale Trust and the Albemarle County Circuit Court and the sound of Kristen's voice suggesting that I was standing in the way of the inevitable. Ellen said yes without asking why. That is the quality I love most in her. We drove down on a Friday morning. We walked. We read on the porch. We talked about Harold and about Ellen's late husband, Gerald, and about the way autumn smells in that particular valley. Dry leaves and cold creek water and wood smoke. We did not talk about any of it until Sunday evening, when Ellen said, "You're carrying something, Dorothy." "I'm working on it," I said. "I know," she said. "That's not the same thing." She was right. But I drove home Monday morning feeling steadier than I had in weeks. Sometimes rest is not an absence of action. Sometimes rest is the action. He came alone on a Thursday evening, 3 days after I returned from the valley. No Kristen. No blazer this time. Just his old blue fleece, the one he'd had since college. The one I'd washed 100 times in this very house. A deliberate choice, I thought. The fleece was about memory. The fleece was meant to remind me that he was still my boy. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table this time, not the formal living room. He'd asked, and I'd agreed, because the kitchen had been our place. Homework at that table, late-night talks, the long silences after Harold's death, when we'd sit across from each other with our hands wrapped around mugs and not know what to say. He knew what the kitchen meant to me. He was counting on it. "I want to apologize," he said, "for Kristen, for how she spoke to you." I waited. "She's been under a lot of pressure. The divorce it's been harder than I expected. There are things I didn't see coming." He paused, traced a knot in the kitchen table with his thumb. "I didn't come here to pressure you, Mom. I came because I think we got off on the wrong foot with all of this, and I miss you." Was that true? Perhaps parts of it. Ricky was not a wholly bad man. I had known him since the moment he was born, had held him during every fever and heartbreak and failure of his life. The love was real. But love and honesty are not always the same currency. And at that moment, they were not. "Tell me about the consultant," I said. He looked up. "The financial advisor who told you the trust would pass to you. I want to know his name." A slight tightening around his eyes. "That's not really. Mom, that's not what I came to talk about." "I know what you came to talk about," I said. "You came to talk me out of what Margaret is doing. You came to ask me gently, as your mother, to step back and let this proceed the way someone, you or Kristen or this consultant, planned for it to proceed." I folded my hands on the table. "I'm not going to do that. Mom, I love you, Ricky. I have loved you every single day of your life without condition. But what's happening here is not right. The trust belongs to me. I am not ill. I am not incapacitated. I am not anywhere near the end of my life. And I am not going to sign away what your father spent his life building because someone gave you a misleading picture and counted on my not noticing." He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller, more honest. "I didn't know, Mom, about the trust. I genuinely didn't know it was more complicated. He made it sound simple." "Who is he?" I asked again. Ricky looked at me, and for a moment I thought he would tell me. I could see it moving behind his eyes. Then something settled over his face. Not hardness exactly, but a closing. "I can't," he said. "Not yet." He left 20 minutes later. At the door, he hugged me, and I let him. And I stood on the porch and watched him go and felt the ache of it. The particular grief of loving someone who has been led somewhere you cannot follow. Then I went inside, called Ellen, and told her all of it. "Come to church Sunday," she said. "I want you to talk to Pastor William. I am not a woman who discusses her legal affairs with clergy." But Pastor William Daly was not a man who kept to the usual lanes of pastoral advice. He was in his late 60s, a former civil rights attorney who had come to ministry in his 50s, and he had a way of listening that was entirely free of judgment and entirely full of attention. I had known him for 12 years. I met with him after the 11 o'clock service in his small office behind the sanctuary. The window looked out onto the churchyard, the old stones bright in the thin October sun. "Tell me where you are," he said. I told him. Not all the legal details, just the shape of it. My son, the trust, the pressure, the choice I was facing. He listened without speaking. Then he said, "Dorothy, are you afraid?" "Yes," I said. "Of what exactly?" I thought about it. "Of being wrong about my son. Of this ending in a way that can't be repaired." "Is there a way," he said carefully, "that not acting would repair it?" I considered that. "No." "Then fear is the wrong guide here," he said. "Not a reason to stop, just a condition to move through." He paused. "You know what's right. You've known from the beginning. The question is only whether you trust yourself enough to do it." I drove home in the blue afternoon light with something that had been unsteady, now made firm. I had my lawyer. I had my documents. I had Ellen and Pastor William and 41 years in a house Harold built with love and intention. I was not alone, and I was not going to stop. They came back on a Saturday morning in early November, when the maples on Maple Ridge Road had gone the color of old copper, and the air was sharp enough to make your eyes water. I was in the garden cutting back the last of the dahlias when I heard the car. The same dark blue SUV. Together again. So the divorce was on pause, or the divorce had served its purpose, or perhaps there had never been a divorce in the way Ricky had imagined there would be. I was no longer surprised by the choreography. I set down my clippers and pulled off my gloves and walked to meet them on the front porch, because I was not going to let them inside this time. The house was Harold's house. My house. I was not going to let whatever they had come to do happen inside it. Kristen's face had been recalibrated since the last visit. She was softer now, the sharp cheekbones less weaponized, a tentative smile in place of the managing efficiency she usually wore. She was wearing her hair differently, down instead of pulled back. She had thought about this visit. "Dorothy," she said, "thank you for seeing us." "I didn't know you were coming," I said. "We should have called." She glanced at Ricky, who nodded slightly. "We wanted to come and say, we're sorry for how the last conversation went. Ricky and I have been doing a lot of talking, and we realized we've been handling this all wrong. We don't want to be adversarial. We're family." There was that phrase again. We're family. Different voice, same words. "What is it you want?" I said. Kristen clasped her hands. "We want to propose something, a compromise. We know the trust is yours, Dorothy. We've never disputed that. We thought that if maybe you were open to a conversation with all of us together, with both of our attorneys present, we could find an arrangement that works for everyone. A voluntary partial distribution, perhaps. Something that gives Ricky some stability while you're still here to see it." She paused. The pause was meant to land on while you're still here. "Something that means you don't have to go through a long legal process," Ricky added. "You don't have to spend the rest of your—" He stopped again. The same sentence he hadn't finished last time. Say what you mean, I said. Mom, you're suggesting, I said slowly, that I voluntarily transfer a portion of the trust assets to Ricky in order to avoid a legal proceeding. And you're using my age, the fact that I'm 68, as the lever. The implication being that I don't have enough time left to spend on a fight, so I should settle now and be done with it. The porch was very quiet. A crow called somewhere down the road. Kristen's soft expression tightened at the edges. Just slightly. Enough. That's not what we said, she said. No, I agreed, it's what you meant. I watched Kristen's composure make a decision and lose it briefly. The soft face went away, and what came back was the version of her I recognized. Precise, controlled, slightly contemptuous. Dorothy, you are making this so much harder than it needs to be. We have a consultant, an attorney, and documentation that establishes a reasonable basis for Raymond to be recognized as the beneficial owner of the trust assets under the circumstances of Kristen. My voice was steady. I have read every document in that trust. I have retained one of the finest estate attorneys in this county, and I have done nothing that isn't entirely within my rights as trustee and sole beneficiary. If you have documentation that suggests otherwise, you are welcome to present it in court. That is exactly what courts are for. Ricky stood up straight. You'd really do this? You'd really go to court against your own son? I would do what is necessary to protect what your father and I built, I said. That has always been true. I'm sorry you forgot it. Kristen said one final thing in a voice pitched low and even. This will cost you everything, Dorothy. By the time the attorneys are done, there won't be anything left worth fighting over. Think about that. I said nothing. They got in the dark blue SUV. The engine started. They drove away. I stood on the porch for a while after the car had gone. My hand on the post Harold had set in concrete 40 years ago. I was not entirely calm. There was a tremor somewhere behind my sternum. A thin, cold fear, the kind you can't entirely reason away. But I noticed something interesting about that fear. Every time it rose, it brought something with it. Not paralysis, but a strange, clarifying fuel. As if the fear itself was evidence that what I was doing mattered. That the ground I was standing on was real and worth standing on. This will cost you everything. I thought about Harold's green lamp, his block lettering on the folder, his hands on this porch post, tamping the concrete down, even and firm. No, I thought, it will cost them. The hearing was scheduled for the second week of December, which meant I spent the last weeks of November sitting across from Margaret Cole's desk, going over documents the way I used to go over exam papers at the kitchen table with Ricky, methodically. Nothing skipped, nothing assumed. Margaret had done extraordinary work. In the weeks since our first meeting, she had, through the discovery process, obtained communications between Kristen and a man named Foster Blanchard, a financial consultant based in Richmond who had a history, as it turned out, of advising families in similar situations. 3 prior complaints had been filed against him with the Virginia State Bar's Financial Advisor Oversight Board, none resulting in formal discipline, all describing a pattern. Identifying wealthy elderly women whose adult children were eager for inheritance, presenting a misleading picture of asset transferability, and positioning himself to take a consulting fee when assets moved. He had apparently been introduced to Ricky by a mutual contact in Ricky's real estate network 18 months prior. The emails were revelatory. In one, Blanchard wrote to Kristen, not to Ricky, to Kristen, that the trust would be easily accessible once the right narrative was established, and that Dorothy was unlikely to contest aggressively given her age and the family relationship. In another, Kristen asked about timing. How soon after Ricky files can we begin the distribution discussion? Blanchard replied, Once the divorce petition establishes the inheritance as a marital expectation, it changes the leverage entirely. So it had been Kristen's design, not Ricky's. Or at least not entirely Ricky's. Ricky had been, if not innocent, then at least partly deceived. Led to believe the inheritance was straightforward, that the divorce from Kristen would free him to receive it cleanly, when in fact the divorce was part of a strategy to create a legal context in which the trust assets could be argued as subject to equitable distribution. I felt something complex when I read those emails. Not vindication exactly, more like grief wearing vindication's clothes. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. A magistrate's courtroom in the Albemarle County Courthouse. Wood paneling. Winter light through high, narrow windows. I sat at the table beside Margaret in my good wool coat, the navy one I had bought the year Harold died because I needed something reliable to wear to things I didn't want to attend. I had worn it to Harold's funeral. I thought that was appropriate. Ricky was at the adjacent table with his attorney, a young man from Charlottesville who kept straightening his tie. Kristen sat in the gallery, not a party to this particular proceeding, but present, watchful, in her sharpest coat. The magistrate, a woman in her late 50s named Judge Wentworth, with wire-rimmed glasses and a manner that suggested she had heard every variety of family litigation and was impressed by none of it, reviewed Margaret's declaration of trustee authority first. "Counsel," she said to Ricky's attorney, "is there a genuine dispute as to Mrs. Hale's status as sole trustee and primary beneficiary of the Hale family trust?" Ricky's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we contend that the trust document, properly interpreted in context of—" "The trust document is not ambiguous," Judge Wentworth said, without looking up from the pages. "I've read it. Is there an amendment I'm not seeing?" "Not a formal amendment, Your Honor, but there is a letter." He produced a document. A letter signed by the late Harold Hale indicating his intention that his son Raymond assume. "An expression of intent is not an amendment," Judge Wentworth said. "Do you have an amended trust document?" A pause. "No, Your Honor." The next hour was methodical and not theatrical. Margaret presented the trust documents. She presented the discovery emails. She presented Foster Blanchard's complaint history. She presented Ricky's original text to me. "I just found out I inherited $1 million family fortune." And she asked me from the stand what the basis of that belief could have been. "My son was told," I said carefully, "that the trust would pass to him under conditions that had already been met." That was not accurate. "And who told him that?" "The emails suggest that Foster Blanchard told him, and that Mr. Blanchard had been coordinating with Kristen Hale about the strategy and timing involved." When Margaret introduced those emails into the record, I watched Ricky's face change. He turned toward the gallery, toward Kristen, with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of a man who has just understood something that changes the entire shape of a story he thought he knew. Kristen's face, by contrast, did not change. That was almost more chilling. She sat very still in her good coat and looked at nothing in particular. A woman who had prepared for this moment and was now simply waiting to see how bad it would be. Ricky's attorney attempted a reframe, argued that the emails reflected only a discussion of options, not an agreement to misrepresent. Judge Wentworth listened patiently. Then she said, "Counsel, are you contending that your client was unaware of these communications?" "Not entirely unaware, Your Honor, but then he was a participant, at least partially, in the strategy being outlined. That significantly weakens the argument that he was acting on a good faith misunderstanding." She paused. "This court finds no basis for contesting Mrs. Dorothy Hale's status as sole trustee and primary beneficiary. The trust assets are not subject to characterization as marital property in the Hale divorce proceeding." She set down her pen, Mr. Hale, she said, looking at Ricky directly, you are listed as a contingent beneficiary of this trust. That status remains unchanged. But it is contingent. I'd suggest you reflect carefully on what that word means. The room was very quiet. I looked at my hands on the table. Good hands, 70 years old, still steady. Margaret touched my arm lightly. That's it, she murmured. That's done. The days after the hearing had the quality of still water. Quiet in a way that felt earned rather than empty. Margaret called me the morning after to say that Ricky's attorney had filed no immediate appeal, which she said was unsurprising. There's nothing to appeal, she said simply. The law is clear. I made myself a proper breakfast that morning. Eggs, toast, the good coffee I usually saved for company, and I ate it slowly at the kitchen table with the winter light coming through the window, and I allowed myself to feel, if not joy exactly, then something adjacent to it. A rightness, a restoration of order. 2 weeks later, developments came in quick succession, the way things do when a structure has been hollowed out from within and is finally beginning to settle. Ricky and Kristen's divorce proceedings resumed, now without the specter of the trust assets as leverage. Virginia equitable distribution applied to what they actually had, the equity in their jointly owned condominium in Charlottesville, 2 cars, shared investment accounts. What they had, divided in 2, was modest. Ricky's income from real estate would support him. Kristen's income from her marketing job would support her. Neither was impoverished, but neither had the windfall that had apparently been the entire premise of the plan. I thought about that, about how much damage had been done, how many relationships strained and broken in pursuit of something that had never actually existed. The inheritance Ricky had been promised was a fiction from the beginning, a story someone had told him because it was useful, not because it was true. Margaret had filed a formal complaint with the Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation against Foster Blanchard, documenting the pattern of conduct across multiple cases, including ours. The inquiry was opened within weeks. I was told some months later that his consulting license had been suspended pending a full investigation. I did not feel satisfaction exactly, more a sense of accurate consequence. The machinery of accountability moving the way it is supposed to move, slowly but without sentiment. As for Kristen, Margaret had noted that the emails could form the basis of a civil claim against her for tortious interference, interfering with an expected inheritance through fraudulent misrepresentation. She laid out the options clearly and without pressure. I appreciated that. Margaret never pushed. She simply showed me the doors and let me choose which ones to open. I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about the cost of continued litigation. Not the financial cost, which I could manage, but the cost in attention, in energy, in the ongoing occupation of my mind by people I would prefer to think about less. I thought about what Harold would have said. Harold had been a practical man, not a vengeful one. He believed in resolution, in closing things cleanly and moving forward. Don't let the fight become the point, he used to say. The point is what comes after. Then I called Margaret and said, I don't want to spend the next year in further litigation. I want to live my life, but I want a formal letter from Kristen's attorney acknowledging the conduct and releasing any future claims against the trust. Nothing less. Margaret negotiated it in a week and a half. Kristen signed. Her attorney, I was told, had advised her in the strongest terms to do so. The letter was not an apology. I had not expected one, and I did not need one. What it was a legal acknowledgement that Kristen had participated in representations about the trust that were not accurate, and that she held no claims, current or future, against any asset within the Hale family trust. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the court. I read it once, set it in the folder with Harold's block lettering, and locked the drawer. There was one conversation I still needed to have. I called Ricky in January and asked him to meet me at the house. He came, this time without the blue fleece or the blazer, in a plain jacket and an expression I hadn't seen on him in years, something stripped of performance. He sat at the kitchen table, and for a while neither of us spoke. The silence was not hostile. It was the silence of two people who have been through something and are trying to find their footing on the other side of it. "I didn't know all of it," he said at last. "I want you to believe that." "I believe you didn't know all of it," I said carefully. "I also believe you knew enough to make a choice and made the wrong one." He absorbed that. The divorce would have gone through without the trust thing. That part was real. Kristen and I— He stopped. "That was already over." "I'm sorry for that," I said, and I meant it. "Are we—" He looked at the table. "Is there a way back from this?" I thought about Pastor William, about the shape of roads that come back and the ones that don't. "I don't know yet," I said. "That will depend on what you do from here, not on what you say today." I paused. "But I'm not closing the door. I want you to know that." He nodded. He looked, for a moment, like the boy who used to do his homework at this table, who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and present them as though they were orchids. The love was still there. It had just been buried under a great deal of accumulated bad decision. He left as the afternoon light was going golden on the kitchen floor. I stood in the doorway and watched him go, and I did not feel like someone who had won. I felt like someone who had survived, which is a different thing, and in some ways heavier. But I felt, more than anything, like myself. Like Dorothy Hale of Maple Ridge Road, Charlottesville, Virginia. Trustee, widow, mother, still standing. Spring came to Maple Ridge Road as it always has. First the crocuses along the driveway, then the forsythia, then the dogwoods coming into extravagant bloom the way they do in Virginia in April, as though they've been saving all winter for exactly this. I stood at the kitchen window on the first warm morning and watched a pair of cardinals argue over the feeder Harold had hung from the walnut tree. And I thought, this is still mine. All of this is still mine. It was not a triumphant thought. It was quieter than that. A settling, the way a house sounds after a storm has passed. I had the front porch repainted. I had wanted to do it for 2 years and had kept not doing it, the way you keep not doing things when your energy is occupied with maintenance rather than living. The painters came on a warm Thursday, 2 young men who worked cheerfully and finished in a day, and I sat in the garden with my coffee and watched the porch become fresh and white again, and thought, yes, this. Small things matter after large battles. Perhaps they matter more. Ellen and I went to Portugal in May, Lisbon first, then a week in the Alentejo, the golden wheat field country south of the capital. I had not been to Europe in 11 years. I had told myself I was waiting for the right time. I understood now that the right time is the time when you decide it is. We drank local wine on a hillside terrace above an olive grove and watched the sun go down over a landscape that had been here 10,000 years and would be here 10,000 more. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, simply, uncomplicatedly glad to be alive. Ellen took a photograph of me on that terrace, the light going amber, the olive trees silver behind me. And when she showed me the screen, I almost didn't recognize the woman in it. She looked rested. She looked like someone who had arrived somewhere better. I kept that photograph. It is on my nightstand now. I had a handsome great-nephew, Devon, in his 2nd year of mechanical engineering at Virginia Tech, working part-time to help with tuition. After Portugal, I called him and told him I was setting up an educational support arrangement. Not a gift, an arrangement with expectations about grades and completion. He was so surprised he didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Aunt Dorothy, I don't know what to say." I told him he didn't need to say anything, just finish school. He did, the following year, and I was in the front row when he walked across the stage. Margaret Cole and I had lunch twice a year now, as friends. She was sharp and funny, and entirely without sentimentality, and I found that combination deeply refreshing. Once over coffee, she said, "You know what's unusual about your case, Dorothy? Most people wait too long. You didn't." I told her I'd had a good teacher in Harold, who always said, "The time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining." Pastor William officiated at a small ceremony in October when I dedicated a reading bench in the churchyard in Harold's name. Simple painted wood, a small bronze plaque. Harold Chester Hale. He built things to last. 12 people came. It was exactly right. As for the others, Foster Blanchard's consulting license was formally revoked by the DPOR in September. 3 other families had come forward during the investigation, each with a similar story. His business was finished. He relocated to another state. Some things deserve to become simply absent from your life. Kristen moved to Richmond. She changed jobs twice in the year following the divorce settlement, which gave her about $200,000 from the shared assets. Enough for a start, not enough for the life she had envisioned. I did not wish her misery. I had wished for justice, and justice had arrived without any further contribution from me. Ricky took an apartment in the Fan District. He called me on my birthday in August, and we talked for 40 minutes. The longest, most honest conversation we'd managed in perhaps 10 years. He did not ask about the trust. We talked about Harold, about a fishing trip when Ricky was 12, about an afternoon on the Rapidan River when a rainbow trout got away and Harold laughed so hard he had to sit down on the bank. It was not repaired, but it was not closed. He had started calling on Sunday evenings, short calls, ordinary, the gradual daily evidence of different choices. I did not rush it. Some things take exactly as long as they take. I was patient. I had time. The house on Maple Ridge Road stood as it always had. The walnut tree, the blue jays, Harold's flagstones, the porch bright white in the evening light. I came home to it after Lisbon and Devon's graduation and lunches with Margaret and Sundays with Pastor William, and every time I stood in the doorway for a moment and let it settle around me. Mine, built with love, held with care, still standing. And so that is the story of how I, Dorothy Hale of Charlottesville, Virginia, sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a crossword and a text message I hadn't expected, and chose, at 68 years old, to stand up. The lesson, if there is one, is simple. Know what is yours, and do not be afraid to say so. Not with cruelty, not with performance, but with clarity, documentation, and a good attorney. People will sometimes count on your love to make you compliant. They are counting wrong. What would you have done in my place? I'd genuinely like to know. Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you, truly, for sitting at this table with me.